Insta360 X3 can be a great choice for shooting underwater. It has advantages that no other camera has. You can flexibly adjust the framing of your underwater shots, and since recently there is also the possibility to make the selfie stick and the camera invisible underwater. However, the handling is not that easy and you can do a lot of things wrong. For best results, you need the right accessories, and you have to set up the camera correctly. Today I'll show you everything you need to know. At the end, I'll then show you a few tricks to make even better videos with the X3 underwater. First though, let's get to grips with the accessories you'll need. As you know, a 360 camera has 2 image sensors and 2 lenses. So basically 2 cameras. The footage from the 2 sensors is then stitched together into a single shot. Normally, this lens stitching works smoothly and automatically. Unfortunately, this is not the case underwater. The X3 is waterproof up to 10 meters, even without a case. But due to the refraction of light underwater, lens stitching does not work correctly in 360 mode underwater. So you can shoot underwater with the X3 without accessories, but only in single lens mode. If you want to take a 360 shot underwater, you will definitely need a dive case from Insta360, because the dive case solves the lens stitching problem. Only if you shoot with the dive case, the shots of the 2 lenses of your X3 will be stitched together correctly. These shots were taken in 360 mode with the dive case, which Insta360 has been offering for a while now. Although the shots were taken in 360 mode, you can see the pole in the shots. This is due to the construction of the dive case. The lower part could not be removed from the shot. While you could reframe the shot, the advantage of the invisible selfie stick was lost, and you basically had to use the X3 underwater like a classic action camera. And this has now changed, because recently Insta360 released a new dive case with which you can finally use the X3 underwater with all the advantages of a 360 camera. I recently returned from Croatia, from the Mediterranean Sea, but unfortunately only had the old dive case with me. So most of the underwater shots in this video were taken with the old dive case. Since I live in the mountains, I got to show you the new dive case here in the pool. And as you can see, it works great. The pole disappears from the shot as usual, and you can now reframe the shot in any direction without the dive case getting in the way. To do that though, you now also have to mount the X3 like a 360 camera, straight on a selfie stick and without turning the camera in any direction. While I preferred the pole with a hinge or a floating hand grip for the old dive case, I would recommend the standard invisible selfie stick from Insta360 in the length of 114 cm for the new case. It is my overall favorite pole, as it becomes very small when pushed together and is therefore easy to store. The combination of the new dive case and invisible selfie stick has only one drawback: it sinks. So to prevent losing your camera, consider attaching a strap to the selfie stick. You can find a link to all the accessories I mentioned today in the video description. And yes, the new dive case is relatively expensive, so you should probably know that the dive case is more than just a plastic case. It needs to be built in such a way that the light falls on the camera lenses at the optimal angle to allow lens stitching and selfie stick removal. In that sense, it's more of an add-on lens than just a plastic case. Insta360 also offers an X3 invisible dive kit for new users, which includes the X3, the dive case, the selfie stick and the hand grip at a very interesting price. You can also find a link to this in the video description. Whether you use the new or the old dive case, there are a few important things to keep in mind for proper use and good results. First, you should update the firmware of your X3 to the latest version. Especially when used with the new dive case, the firmware of the X3 must be up to date. Then you need to insert the X3 correctly. As you can see, the dive case has buttons on one side. The X3 must be inserted so that these buttons are on the same side as the camera buttons. If the display is on the front, that would be the right side. To the left and right of the lenses are 2 slots that you can slide these inserts into. You get the inserts with the dive case and they look like cardboard. It's an anti-fog insert. It's supposed to prevent the case from fogging, as the name implies. Then you can close the dive case and lock all 4 buckles. Now the X3 would be ready for use underwater. But before you even put the X3 in the dive case and close the dive case, you have to activate the dive case mode on the camera. To do this, simply swipe your finger down from the top edge and open the main menu. You can activate the dive case mode via this icon at the bottom center. You can also activate the dive case mode when the camera is already in the dive case by pressing and holding the Q button, which is the lower button on the side. Only in dive case mode will the lens stitching work properly underwater and the camera can be operated correctly underwater. So it's important that you activate it. However, the operation of the camera changes completely in this mode. You only have 2 buttons and no touchscreen anymore. If you briefly press the lower button, the Q button, you start and stop a recording. If you briefly press the upper button, the power button, you can change the recording mode. And if you briefly press the Q button twice, you can switch to single lens mode and also change the lens. If you press and hold the Q button, you can exit the dive case mode. If you press and hold the power button, you can turn the camera off and on. Most importantly, once the dive case mode is active, you can start and stop recording with a short press of the bottom button and change the recording mode with the top power button. In order to enjoy the dive case for a long time, you should also be aware of 3 things. The dive case changes the incidence of light on the lens. It is therefore mainly suitable for use underwater and is not particularly suitable for use out of water, for example for surfing. It is made of a relatively scratch-sensitive plastic. You should therefore not place it on rocks. It will get scratched very quickly. After use, you should store it in its bag. Salt water will damage all materials in the long run, including the plastic of the dive case. After using salt water, you should wash it thoroughly. Insta360 even recommends soaking it closed for 60 minutes. This is the only way to completely remove all salt residues. To mount the X3 in the dive case more stable straight on the pole, you can also use one of these rings. Remember, for the invisible selfie stick effect, the X3 must be attached straight. You can also use the thumb screw wrench to tighten the screw even more. Once you have switched to dive case mode, you can no longer change the recording settings, so frame rate, color profile, and so on. The currently active settings are used. For this reason, you should define the optimal underwater settings before you switch to dive case mode. That's why I'll now show you how to set your X3 optimally for taking shots underwater. Apart from the photo mode, you should almost always use the standard video mode underwater. And only in 360 mode can you benefit from the aforementioned advantages of the X3, such as reframing and invisible selfie stick even underwater. The single lens mode offers the advantage that you don't have to reframe your recordings, but you don't have any other advantages when it comes to image quality. The 4K single lens shots hardly look better than processed 360 shots. As for resolution, you should always use a resolution of 5.7K. This resolution offers a clearly better image quality than 4K. In terms of frame rate, more frames per second will result in smoother footage. The low frame rates of 24-25 frames per second are suitable for creating a cinematic look. However, when shooting underwater, this is not the goal. You want to create a particularly natural look to reproduce the nature experience as well as possible. That's why I recommend a frame rate of 30 frames per second underwater. In 4K, even 60 frames per second would be possible, which could lead to an even smoother and more natural looking shot. However, due to the poorer image quality in 4K, I would do without it. Sometimes you may be diving very deep and there is little light. If you know this ahead of time, it may make sense to use a frame rate of 24 frames per second in these situations. Simply because a low frame rate is advantageous in low light conditions, because the camera can capture more light. If you swipe from the right edge to the left, you open the menu with the additional capture settings. Underwater, I would avoid using manual exposure settings. The lighting conditions can change quickly, and as I said, you don't have the possibility to adjust the settings all the time. I therefore stay in automatic mode. Here, I would like to show you a few things. On the far left, you can set the color profile. You have the choice between standard, log, and vivid. The difference between standard and vivid lies mainly in the saturation. Vivid has a little more saturation and maybe a little more contrast. If you don't plan to edit the colors of your shot yourself, vivid is certainly the best choice. If you want to edit the colors yourself, you should choose standard, or even log. Log is a very desaturated color profile that is quite usable and also offers a bit more dynamic range. You'll also have to invest a bit more time in editing the footage though. For now, I'll leave the setting at vivid. The correct white balance ensures that colors are displayed correctly. White should always look white. The right value depends on the color of the water, the amount of sunlight, and also the depth you're at. So if you wanted to set it manually, it would need to be changed constantly. This is hardly possible with a camera like the X3, nor does it make sense. The automatic system also works relatively well. Via exposure value or EV, you can set how bright or dark your shot should be exposed. Depending on the incidence of light, the shot can sometimes have very bright and very dark areas in the same image. Especially the bright areas can then look overexposed. It can be difficult to correct this in post. To prevent this, you could try setting a slightly negative value under EV, for example -0.5. But again, I would only recommend this if you are editing your videos, because in that case you can still brighten up the dark areas a bit in post. I leave the last setting for isolated exposure at off. There are two important recording settings in the main menu that you should also consider. For this, swipe from the top to the bottom and select the settings icon. Here you should make sure that the video bitrate is set to high. This allows the camera to store as much information as possible when recording, which leads to better image quality. Consumer cameras like the X3 tend to artificially emphasize the contrast at the edges to make the image look sharper. However, this does not result in more detail in the image and does not look professional. I therefore recommend a sharpness of low. This can sometimes make the image look a bit soft, but you can easily add sharpness in post. If you don't want to edit your videos, then you should use a sharpness of medium. To be able to quickly access our underwater settings in the future, we create a preset. To do this, press the Q button and then the plus in the upper right corner. As name, I select diving and confirm my settings with the check mark. Be careful, there might already be a photo preset with the name diving. For optimal image quality, you should also consider a few things when editing your 360 videos. Today, I'm using the Insta360 Studio desktop app. However, most of the features are also available in the smartphone app. Just like the firmware of the X3, the desktop app and the smartphone app need to be updated to the latest version for use with the new dive case. For correct stitching, make sure that the invisible dive case underwater is selected under stitching in the app. Only then will the underwater shots of the two lenses be stitched together correctly. Under image processing, you can activate Aquavision 2. This will reduce the blue tint that overlays everything underwater and bring out the colors of your shot better. You also have the option to adjust the strength and hue of the effect. Once you are satisfied with the reframing and your editing, you can export the clip. For optimal image quality, you should now select ProRes as the format. This guarantees minimal compression and thus the best possible image quality. However, this is only possible in the desktop app. Now we have our X3 set up optimally for underwater use, we have the right accessories, and yet your underwater shots might not always look the way you want them to. That's why I'm going to give you 3 important tips and tricks along the way. No matter where you take your videos, light is crucial for good image quality. This also applies underwater. More light is usually better. If you dive deeper, the image quality of the recording will suffer. Also pay attention to the position of the sun and adjust your shooting angle accordingly. You don't necessarily want the sun shining in. Even though there is a lot to see underwater, fast and sudden camera movements rarely result in good shots. Simple, slow and steady movements, for example forward, are usually the better choice. This can be done much easier when using fins. With fins, you can create a steady forward motion much better when snorkeling, for example. Always the same underwater world can quickly become boring. When I took my shots in Croatia, the variety was limited. It is therefore much more interesting if you integrate a subject into the shot, for example yourself or another person. That makes the shots much more exciting. And that's it for today. If you want more tips on how to use your X3, I recommend my video on the most common 360 video beginner mistakes. And give me a like as feedback if the video was interesting to you. There will be more videos on the X3 to come. So stay tuned and see you next time.